All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Yes, indeed, I sure am, sis. Nice. I know you love the chill streams, and you know what? You've deserved one for a long time. I'm sorry I've been slacking on them. I will try to be more on top of them. But we got good stuff tonight. So, having said that, welcome everyone to Clumsy Clairvoyance. If you've never been here before, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. Just a FYI, this is not a reading stream. I'm not doing tarot readings during this stream. This is my chill stream to chill with y'all, and we get to watch like some stuff. Now, scary, interesting. Oh, great! I'm back to the lisp with extra T's. Scary, interesting. He dropped some new stuff, y'all. So we definitely have some things to watch. Also, if you've never been here before, welcome. During the chill stream, we watch stuff that I kind of like and that everybody else seems to kind of like from certain creators. I will always drop the link of wherever I'm at so you guys can sub up to them. Um, Hold on. Kay Brazy, so good to see you, lovey. I'm excited for this. I literally just woke up to your happy ending after stream. Nice. Kay Brazy's one who really likes the chill stream. So does Edward, if I'm not mistaken. So you'll probably like them. Hopefully you do. If you don't, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Jiraiya, good to see you. Ash, my lovey, good to see you. Phyllis, of course. Mermaid Messiah, welcome. This is your first chill stream, so welcome. And I saw Moose around here. Hi, Moose. Who else came in here? Who else is here that I didn't say hello to? Mel. Arf, arf. I gotta ask you something. Mel. I was gonna talk to you about something, but I told you that I'll message you in a little bit. Oh, Mermaid, don't worry about that. Y'all, sorry I didn't know this existed. It does. It does exist. So welcome. You grit. Well, call the waitress or waiter. Tell them that you're upset with your water. They didn't order this. There's my mouth. All right. So, okay, it's nothing like important. So just know that. So it's not like you have to read it or anything. It was just something on my mind earlier. I was like, I gotta ask Mel about this. How am I more boomer than woman at this point, Jiraiya? Huh? Explain yourself. I'm actually only half boomer, so psh, so psh, 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 psh. Cheers, you buggers. Okay, I think I said hello to everyone. I'm surprised that Maddie isn't here yet. Thank you, Maddie, wherever you're at for posting the chill stream in the Discord. I appreciate it, Lovey. No, I'm not. Fuck off. I am not. I'm half boomer. You're supposed to be on my side. You hear me, all of y'all's? All right, so, but we're going to start with Scary Interesting. He's got new stuff. That's probably going to watch his too. So I'm going to drop his link, okay? If you guys aren't subbed up to it, his name is Sean from Scary Interesting, and he's worth a sub. He really is. He's good peeps. Like he's my BFF. Okay, so we'll start. I think we're going to start with this one. Hold on. Let me pull it up. Pull up. Okay, I got to share screen. All right, so real quick, I'm going to press play. Just let me know if you can see and hear it, and then I'll make myself smaller, okay?
Everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting and to another collection of horrible fates. The stories you're about to hear range from bizarre to absolutely horrifying. In particular, the final story has one specific.
So just type a 1 or give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear and see, okay? And Anita, this is actually a chill stream. I just ended the readings. So, but if you subscribe to the channel, I will be back tomorrow night, okay, love? Thank you, mermaid. Okay, so I got thumbs up. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, so we are good. Make myself smaller.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting and to another collection of horrible fates. The stories you're about to hear range from bizarre to absolutely horrifying. In particular, the final story has one specific event that is so terrifying and unbelievable that I wouldn't believe it at all if not for the proof found at the end. As always,
Ooh, I can't wait,
discretion
you guys.
is
It sounds like a good one. It sounds like a super good one. It's going to be a good one. Nice.
This is a blue-ringed octopus. There are 4 species of them worldwide that we know about, and all of them are extremely venomous. They're found in tide pools and around coral reefs in Pacific and Indian Oceans, all the way from Australia up to Japan. They're generally yellowish in color with beautiful blue and black rings all over their bodies. They can change color dramatically when they're
Yay,
threatened,
thanks,
and they're
Edward.
also
Phyllis.
some of the world's most venomous marine animals and are extremely dangerous to humans. Just a single blue-ringed octopus has enough venom to kill 26
I've never heard of a
people in minutes.
3-ring or whatever.
But even
it's
worse
called.
than the potency of the
Octopus.
venom is the effect the venom has. The venom is very unique and results in a terrifying condition. The main component of it causes motor paralysis of the muscles, but not just the muscles around the bite. It causes paralysis of the muscles around the entire body. As a result, most of the people who've died from these bites have died from suffocation because their diaphragms are literally paralyzed and can no longer inflate their lungs. So just imagine, you're swimming along in the ocean, and unbeknownst to you, somewhere in the water, you encounter a blue-ringed octopus. Without realizing it, it became threatened and gave you a small, painless bite. A little while later, you start to feel a bit nauseous and a bit off. Then you start to find it hard to move your arms and legs until you're finding it hard to tread water. And suddenly, you can't move your arms at all, and your head dips below the surface. And then you slowly sink to the bottom with no way to resurface. What's worse is that the venom can even cause total body paralysis, where the person is still fully aware of their surroundings but can't move at all. This means they can't even call for help. You just have to hope that you're lucky enough for someone to see that something's wrong, because there's absolutely nothing that can save you otherwise. One day, a man was on the beach somewhere in the Pacific, enjoying the warm sun and warm water. He'd been in and out of the water, checking out the sea life and coral reefs, when he randomly started to feel a little bit nauseous and generally just a little bit strange. As the feeling got stronger, he knew he needed to get out of the water, so he made his way to the shore to sit down on the beach where all of his stuff was. As he walked across the sand, this feeling got stronger and stronger until he was finding it hard to keep walking. Eventually, he just collapsed into the ground to the shock of people nearby. They immediately called a lifeguard, who ran over and started checking the man. As far as the lifeguard could tell, the man wasn't breathing. His pulse was almost non-existent, but his eyes were wide open. This prompted him to roll the man onto his back and start performing CPR. This was incredibly lucky for the man. This is basically the only way to save someone from the effects of the venom. The mechanical action of the pumping on his chest kept the man's blood flowing through his body in the absence of his heart being able to beat, and the air breathed into his lungs delivered crucial oxygen to his brain and vital organs. Another interesting thing about the venom is that it's actually only temporary. It's eventually metabolized in the body, and the effects wear off completely, provided the person doesn't die while paralyzed. So, after some time performing CPR, the man started to twitch. This eventually became stronger until the man was able to move again. Most people are even completely normal 24 hours after a bite. Unfortunately, and horrifyingly for the man, because he had been paralyzed with his eyes open, as he faced the sun while having CPR performed, the sun burned his corneas completely and he was left permanently blind. He would make a full recovery from the venom, but unfortunately, his sight was gone forever. In the summer of 1951, the charred remains of a 67-year-old woman were found in the living room of her Tampa Bay apartment. Most of the body was reduced to ash, but an unburned foot, a section of spine, and a grotesque shrunken skull remained. As a medical doctor, Mary's son Richard probably would have noticed if she'd been acting strangely or feeling under the weather when he visited on the evening of July 1st, 1951. Mary hadn't eaten dinner yet because she was worried that a trip she'd planned to visit friends back in Pennsylvania might fall through, but other than that, nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. Before Richard left, Mary told him that she'd probably take a few sleeping pills, change into her nightgown, and smoke one last cigarette before turning in for the night. The following morning, her landlord, Pansy Carpenter, stopped by to deliver a telegram, but Mary didn't answer the door when she knocked. Pansy then tried to open the door to check on Mary, but found that the doorknob was actually hot to the touch. This prompted her to run home and call the police so they could force their way in and check on her, because Pansy could only think of one reason why the doorknob would be hot from the outside. Officers quickly arrived, but neither they nor Pansy were prepared to find a pile of ashes and body parts where Mary's recliner had once been. Mary's exposed spine and miniature skull were bad enough, but weirdly, the bottom portion of her leg was in almost perfect condition, and her foot was still inside a black slipper that hadn't been burned in the least. Word of the scene spread quickly, and news outlets across the country reported that her body had been incinerated by a fire or a heat source of almost unimaginable intensity. A few plastic electric outlet covers had melted, and the tops of adjacent walls and ceilings were dusted with soot, but weirdly as well, most of the apartment had no signs of being anywhere near heat or fire. In fact, a newspaper just a few feet away was totally unburned, and Mary's white bedsheets looked like they'd just come back from the cleaners. As the initial investigation was being performed by the St. Petersburg Police Department, a number of interesting tips came in. One witness apparently saw a ball of fire enter Mary's window. Another claimed that Mary was murdered and cremated somewhere else and that her killer or killers returned her remains to the apartment afterward. Police considered both scenarios unlikely, but nearly a month into the investigation, they were still stumped otherwise. The police chief said he'd never seen such an odd case in nearly 3 decades on the force, and with public desperate for answers and no reasonable theories other than spontaneous human combustion, the police chief reluctantly contacted the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. The investigators then sent multiple boxes of material and other evidence taken from Mary's apartment to an FBI lab in Washington for further analysis. Meanwhile, since there was no evidence of arson or a rogue lightning strike, people put forth the idea that her death was due to spontaneous human combustion. In theory, this occurs when some internal chemical reaction causes a body to burst into flames. Stories of this happening date back centuries, but the idea that this can even occur at all has been largely debunked. The FBI would rule it out after just a few weeks too, after examining the scene and the material taken from the site. No trace of chemical accelerants were ever detected. They considered the lightning strike angle far-fetched at best. What they came up with was a much more plausible scenario involving something called the wick effect. The wick effect occurs when an external fire or heat source ignites fat inside a body, after which the skin and clothes act like the wick of a candle or an oil lamp. Under the right conditions, the fat-saturated wick can burn for a surprisingly long time and reduce a body almost entirely to ash. This is particularly true with people who have higher than average body fat and who are wearing flammable clothing. And incredibly, in addition to weighing approximately 170 pounds, Mary was wearing a flammable nightgown the night she died. FBI investigators concluded that the most likely scenario was that Mary had taken her sleeping pills on an empty stomach shortly after Richard left. Then she lit a cigarette and promptly fell asleep while it was still lit. Next, an ember or the cigarette itself fell onto her nightgown and caught fire and was subsequently fueled by Mary's body fat and the air from the open window. Sadly, Mary might have woken up if not for the sleeping pills, so as heartbreaking and grisly as it was, Mary's friends and relatives generally agreed with the FBI's findings. As for the undamaged apartment, they chalked up to the sparse furnishings, a concrete floor, and the fact that Mary's easy chair had a few feet of empty space around it in either direction. With that said, not everyone was convinced that the FBI had it right. A renowned anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania who consulted on the case said he couldn't imagine how the body could have burned so completely with such negligible damage to the surrounding apartment. He also pointed out that it typically takes 2 hours of sustained temperatures between 1400 and 2000 degrees to cremate a body, and that arson couldn't be ruled out because the fire itself could have eliminated all trace of chemical accelerants. Some skeptics were also perplexed by Mary's shrunken skull. They pointed to the fact that it should have been cracked or maybe even exploded due to the intense heat, but in fact, this is another urban myth that isn't really known to happen. So in the end, Mary probably died from her careless smoking, her body composition, and a flammable nightgown. Tragically, the telegram her landlord had been trying to deliver to her that morning was the friend from Pennsylvania. Sadly, she just wanted to check with Mary to know that all the necessary trip preparations had been made.
Gosh, that one really sucks.
The North
Next
American
story.
Great Lakes might be some of the more deceptive waters on Earth. Located along the border between Canada and the United States, the 5 lakes are popular destinations for summer vacationers. But the lake's now friendly reputation somewhat overshadows their history as ruthless and unforgiving bodies of water. For those of you not familiar with the Great Lakes, they're not your average small town fishing hole. They live up to their name both in size and treacherousness. Combined, they account for roughly 21% of the world's freshwater by volume, and when weather conditions get dicey, the lakes behave more like small oceans. The violent swells and rogue waves that you'd find there come close to rivaling anything you'd find in the Atlantic or Pacific. And if you think that's an exaggeration, consider that the Great Lakes have combined to sink an estimated 6,000 ships and claim more than 30,000 lives. Some historians even think that the number of shipwrecks could be close to 25,000. Incredibly, this is despite the fact that the Great Lakes aren't sailed year-round either. Because of their brutal climates, the winter, they aren't sailable at all for that part of the year, so many of those shipwrecks occurred in the absence of ice or intense winter winds. When winter does set in, most ships are docked until warm weather returns. Shipping companies will try to stretch their seasons as far as the weather allows, but this is still usually only until late November or early December if they're lucky. In 1966, the Great Lakes shipping industry wasn't so fortunate.
Cool, video
Winter
shot
arrived
right
early that
there. I
year,
love
forcing
it.
crews to ready their ships to dock for the next few months. The crew of the Daniel Johnson Morel were completing their last few tasks before giving the 603-foot
Plain or
freighter its
champion?
annual winter off when an unexpected call came in. A different freighter that was supposed to deliver a load of iron ore from Minnesota to Buffalo experienced mechanical
with the
problems and
lakes.
wouldn't be able to make the run. And with most other freighters already docked, the task was given to the Morel. And although this undid all the work they put into getting the Morel ready for winter, another run was another payday for the crew. So, the 29 men on board shifted gears and the Morel pulled out of the port into Lake Erie and began its journey to Minnesota. Construction on the Morel was completed in 1906 and it soon became the longest ship in service on the Great Lakes, earning the nickname Queen of the Lakes. And even more than 60 years later, the Morel was still more than capable of efficiently and safely completing the routine run, even on such short notice and with the increased threat of inclement weather. Joined by its sister ship, the Edward Y. Townsend, the Morel would make its way from the extreme eastern point of Lake Erie into Lake Huron before it would turn northwest toward Lake Superior and then into Minnesota. On November 28th, just a day after the Morel left port in Lackawanna, New York, signs of a storm grew more apparent as the wind and swells gradually picked up. By nightfall, the Morel and the Townsend were being hammered by 70-mile-an-hour winds and swells that topped the height of both ships. After hours of this, the captain of the Townsend decided it wasn't worth the risk and decided to seek shelter from the storm in the early morning hours of November 29th. Meanwhile, the Morel continued fighting its way north, further and further into Lake Huron. At some point after the Townsend reversed course, the captain of the Morel also realized the risk of continuing on was too great, especially considering the state of his ship. When freighters cross the Great Lakes, the companies that own them make the most out of every nautical mile by hauling loads to and from different ports. An empty ship is a ship that's not making money. Had this occurred during prime shipping season, the Morel would have been loaded up in Buffalo with material meant for Minnesota, where it would then be swapped for a load of material meant for Buffalo. But because the Morel was filling in for a disabled ship and the shipping season was all but over, it was making the trip to Minnesota with nothing on board but its crew. As you might imagine, the weight difference between an empty ship and one loaded to capacity with iron ore is massive. The more weight a ship has on it as well, the more stable it is, particularly in conditions like the one it was in at the moment. Without any ballast in its hull, the Morel was no match for the churning whitecaps Lake Huron had become, and the captain decided it was time to retreat. Below deck, Dennis Hale, a 26-year-old watchman, had somehow been able to sleep through most of the storm. When things turned violent around 2 that morning, Dennis was woken by a loud bang. In weather like that, it is common for the ship to sway so much that it causes the anchor to hit against the hull, so Dennis closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Then when he heard a second and louder bang and saw books falling off the shelf across the room, he jumped out of bed. Wearing only his boxers, Dennis grabbed a pea coat and a life jacket and made a beeline for the deck. Even just by the sounds it was making, the crew knew that it would go down at any moment. These groans were unlike anything they'd ever heard before. They scrambled to abandon the ship and prepared a life raft when another noise none of them had ever heard before temporarily halted the chaos. When the men looked in the direction of the sound, they saw the Morel's bow and stern shear into 2 pieces. The ship was splitting in half right in front of their eyes. Without a moment to spare, Dennis turned and hopped into the raft, while other crewmen who weren't close enough to the raft jumped into the near-freezing water to escape the sinking bow. 3 of his crewmates then swam to the raft, and Dennis pulled them out of the freezing water. Just then, they heard shouts from other crewmen that another ship was approaching from the port side. In a stroke of luck, a nearby ship must have seen the Morel break apart and hurried to rescue the crew. As unlikely as it was, they thought they were as good as saved. Unfortunately, when the ship was close enough to identify, what they saw was beyond belief. It wasn't another ship, it was their ship. The Morel's stern, still powered by its engine, was barreling straight for them, and the raft they were on had no engine or paddles, so there was nothing the men could do but watch the stern close the distance. It then got closer and closer, but then by some miracle, the stern's propeller must have been slightly angled because it turned away from the raft and missed them. The four men then watched it speed off and disappear into the stormy night, and with it, their only source of light. As the sound of the engine faded and was replaced only by the waves and the wind they were now exposed to, they started to process what had happened and the danger they were in. They were now on an inflatable pontoon boat in the middle of Lake Huron with the same storm that just sank their 600-foot freighter. Incredibly, the raft somehow managed to survive the night and the storm, but as the sun started to rise, Dennis saw that two of his crewmates had died, likely from hypothermia. Their clothes were so crusted with ice they were essentially frozen solid. Tragically, later that afternoon, the last of Dennis's crewmates died, leaving him alone in the middle of Lake Huron. About 12 hours after the Morel broke apart and sank, the Townsend pulled into Sault Ste. Marie, which is a city between Lake Huron and Lake Superior. The crew expected to meet up with the Morel there and continue on to a harbor in Minnesota, but there was no sign of the ship or its crew. Knowing how bad the storm was, the Townsend immediately contacted the Coast Guard to report the ship missing. The Coast Guard then put out an alert for all ships to be on the lookout for the Morel and sent several rescue boats and aircraft to search for the missing freighter. Meanwhile, Dennis drifted in and out of consciousness and started hallucinating from his worsening hypothermia. By that afternoon as well, Dennis was so hungry and thirsty that he considered eating the ice off his coat. Just as he was about to, a vision of an elderly man with a white beard begged him not to because it would lower his body temperature and reduce his chances of survival. Then that night, the raft floated close enough to land for Dennis to even see the lights of the homes and farms on the shore. He fired off a few flares but received nothing in response. As the night wore on, he spent most of the time praying, and at one point when he lost consciousness, he even felt himself being pulled up into the clouds and described it as a profoundly euphoric experience. This was then immediately followed by the feeling of being slammed back into his own body. At 4 o'clock the next afternoon, a helicopter spotted a raft with what looked like 4 bodies in it. After almost 38 hours had passed since the Morel sank, the Coast Guard was close to changing the status of their search from rescue to recovery, but they were stunned to find that Dennis had a pulse. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital where things looked so bleak that he was given his last rites. Still, Dennis held on, and in the following days he improved more and more until his condition was upgraded to stable. He'd then spend the next few weeks in the hospital before finally being released. Later, Dennis credited his own lack of clothing with saving his life after seeing how thick and rigid the ice was on the clothing of his dead crewmates. Of the 29 men who were on board the ship, 28 passed away and only 26 of the bodies were ever recovered. Most of them were found the days after the sinking, but others washed ashore as late as the following May. The 2 men whose bodies were never found were officially declared dead in 1967. Later, an investigation into the Morel sinking revealed 4 main causes: extreme weather, an overconfident captain, an empty hull, and a manufacturing defect. Until the late 1940s, ships that sailed the Great Lakes were built using steel that had a high sulfur content. When this type of steel is subjected to freezing conditions, it becomes brittle and more susceptible to cracking. Ships built after 1948 were already made with a different type of steel that's more durable in extreme temperatures, so it was already known prior to the Morel sinking that better steel existed for ship construction. What wasn't known, however, was how dangerous inferior steel was when other variables were at play. In fact, if any one of the 4 main causes of the Morel sinking hadn't been present that night in 1966, there's a chance the ship and its crew might have been fine. Later, the Morel's stern was found about 18 miles north of Port Austin, Michigan in 1967, but the bow wasn't located until 1979. When the whereabouts of the 2 sections were known, more of the Morel's story could be stitched together. Coincidentally, the bow and stern both rest completely upright on the bottom of Lake Huron and are separated by about 6 miles. And interestingly, divers report that the clocks in each section stopped at different times. In the bow, the clocks were stuck at 2:15 a.m., only about 15 minutes after the first signs of trouble. The stern, on the other hand, was still being powered by its engine after it separated from the bow. Its clocks didn't stop until after 5 o'clock that morning, indicating that it spent up to 3 hours sailing around Lake Huron in the dark before the engine finally died and it sank. As for Dennis, life was never the same after he was released from the hospital. Doctors told him that his body temperature was far below normal when he arrived at the hospital, which resulted in severe damage to his extremities. Over the years, he'd go through more than 12 surgeries directly related to his 38-hour ordeal. The feeling in his hands and feet didn't fully return for years after the sinking, and he suffered from PTSD and survivor's guilt for the rest of his life. His injuries meant he'd never sail again, so he trained to become a tool and die maker in an attempt to establish a new sense of normal. When he wasn't at work, he'd hole up in his house and avoid going out in the public because everyone he came across would stare at him. For almost 20 years, Dennis refused to talk about the sinking because it was too mentally and emotionally painful for him to recount. That changed in 1982 when a film about the shipwreck was made and Dennis was invited to speak at the premiere. He told his story for the first time in front of 300 people, and when he left the stage that night, he felt like he shed the crushing weight he had been carrying for those 16 years. It was then that he knew his purpose in life was to keep the memory of the Morel and its crew alive. From that night in 1982, Dennis took every opportunity he could to share what happened to the Morel with newspapers and TV stations and during speaking engagements at libraries, museums, and schools. He later wrote an autobiography called Shipwrecked, Reflections of the Sole Survivor, and in 1998, he joined the Marine Museum in his hometown as its curator, and he spoke frequently about his experience with visitors. Dennis finally passed away on September 2nd, 2015 from cancer at the age of 75. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this set of stories, and if you're not sure about which
Okay. So which one do you got? Don't worry, we still have one more to watch together. Which one did you think was the worst out of all of them, you guys? Which story did you think was like the most horrifying? About the most horrifying. Are you the youngest in chat? What year were you born again? Oh, chilling. Yes, Tiffany, it's a chill stream, so welcome. I don't know. Ash, what year were you born again? Like 90 or something? The octopus one? Yeah, that one was kind of creepy. '91. I don't think you're the youngest in chat. You may actually, maybe you are. Ask chat if you're the youngest. See if anyone's younger than you. Oh, 91. Look, Tiffany, were you born in 91 too? Cute. Adorbs. Okay, so I'm going to post his link again real quick. That's who we're watching, all right? The lady catching on fire. Okay, so hold, please. Oh, this one ought to be good. I'm interested in this one. Okay, so let me share again. All right, just give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear and see okay.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting. In this video, we're going to look at two incredibly creepy cases of people disappearing and some found footage related to each of the cases that makes things even more disturbing.
Are we good on the volume and everything? Just type 1 or give me a thumbs up, y'all. We're good? Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is his, scary interesting. He does like a few different kind of like themes, and this is the one of so this is one on the creepy disappearing or creepy disappearances, I think, something like that. So let's roll.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting. In this video, we're going to look at two incredibly creepy cases of people disappearing and some found footage related to each of the cases that makes things even more disturbing. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. In 2006, life was going really well for Jennifer Kess. 3 years earlier, she'd graduated with honors from the University of Central Florida, where she'd been studying for a degree in finance. It wasn't hard for her to find a job after either, and so almost right away, she landed a position as a financial analyst for an investment firm. Her personality was a perfect fit for the job. Jennifer always wanted to learn more, and she had a dynamic energy that could light up any room. At the same time, her parents also instilled a sense of caution in her. They'd been mugged at gunpoint in New Jersey years earlier, and they wanted their daughter to always be safe. By feeding this combination of energy and caution into her work, she got promoted twice in 2 years, quickly earning enough money to buy a condo at the Mosaic Millennia condominium complex in Orlando. And for the most part, this was a great place to live. It was fancy and gated and was right in the heart of the city and only a mile down the road from a brand new mall. When she moved in, a lot of the condos were still undergoing a conversion from apartments, and because of this, she had to put up with a lot of construction work and the construction workers that came with it. The daily comments and catcalls obviously were incredibly annoying, and whenever one of the workers had to go into her apartment to do anything, she was on the phone with her parents until they left, just to be safe. But she thought it was worth it to own such a prime piece of real estate so young, and the workers would be gone before too long anyway. If it ever got too much, she could always rely on her boyfriend Rob to talk to the workers and get them to tone things down. Jennifer and Rob met while Rob was visiting Orlando for a trade show that her firm was exhibiting, and from then on, Rob and Jennifer were said to be very much in love, even though they chose not to move in together. They both had careers they wanted to focus on, and because their jobs were about 3 hours apart, they had to make do with a long-distance relationship in the meantime. Instead, they made up for lost time every weekend and called each other and texted each other daily. In 2005, they decided to go on a 5-day vacation together the following January and flew out to St. Croix in the British Virgin Islands. Their return flight landed late in the evening, so Jennifer decided to spend the night at Rob's and then drive straight to work the following morning. She had a normal day at work, despite being tired, and then at about 6 p.m., she left her office and went home and called her dad and brother to tell them how amazing her trip had been. Then after getting home, she called her mother and her closest friend, and she told them every detail on how the trip was like something out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Rob felt exactly the same way. On the day they returned, his best friend even joked with him that he was in love with Jennifer, even if he wouldn't admit it. Sadly for Rob, the last time he spoke to Jennifer didn't go so well. At 10 p.m., she called and they got into an argument. Rob said that the long-distance relationship was making things more complicated than they wanted, which was one of the reasons he found it hard to admit to himself how much he cared about her. The following morning, Rob didn't get the call he usually got from Jennifer before she left work. He tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail, and at first, he was worried that she was still upset with him for the disagreement the night before, but he thought she'd just cool down at work and then they could talk. So he went to his morning meeting, and after he came out, he tried to call her again, and again, it went to voicemail. After the next meeting, he tried again, and the same thing happened. This wasn't normal behavior for Jennifer, and their argument hadn't been that bad, so Rob started to get worried. At the same time, Jennifer's boss called one of Jennifer and her parents' mutual friends. Jennifer hadn't turned up to work and hadn't called, which was extremely unusual. She was the type of person who was happy to get up at 6 a.m. and drive 3 hours to make it to the office on time. She would even call the office if she was only just 5 minutes late. So next, figuring she might be at her parents', the family friend then called to find out if she was over there, maybe too sick to tell anyone. Her dad took the call in his office and Jennifer wasn't there, so he called her cell phone. His call then also went to voicemail, and it never went to voicemail. The family had one rule: if one of the parents called, you answered. When they were a little younger, not answering the phone meant losing their phone and car privileges, and even though Jennifer was older now, it was a habit that had stuck. Right away, her parents seemed to sense that something terrible had happened, so the whole family jumped in their car and set off to Orlando. As they drove, her dad called the police, and then they called the condo office to see if they could check and see if her car was still there. Someone went down to check, but he couldn't see it, so even more worried, her parents asked him to check out her condo. A few moments later, after the worker had found another person to make sure it was legal to enter, the man from the condo called back. No one was in her apartment, and everything looked fine. When the family arrived, they looked inside Jennifer's place, and it was just as the guy from the office described it. The t-shirt she wore into bed was on the floor, her makeup was all over her countertop, and the shower and a towel were still wet. It seemed apparent that she'd at least gotten ready for work and hadn't been gone for long. While they were there, they were met by a police officer, and her parents explained what was happening and tried to make them understand that this wasn't normal behavior. Unfortunately, the officer either didn't get it or didn't care. He told them she probably just went somewhere to cool off after arguing with her boyfriend and then left the scene. So with the police doing nothing, Jennifer's parents got as many friends and family together as possible and started looking for her themselves. They put up posters, handed out flyers with her picture, and went everywhere that Jennifer might have gone, which included the mall, her favorite bars, and her usual route to work. That night, when she still hadn't shown up, the police finally declared her missing. 2 days later, a tenant living close by recognized her car from a news report and let the police know that one just like it had been sitting abandoned outside her apartment for days. Later, another person claimed to have spotted Jennifer's car swerving near her condo, with 2 people struggling to control the steering wheel inside. However, this crucial piece of information didn't come forward until much later. When they initially found the car, it was parked a mile from her place in another condo complex called Huntington in the Green. This wasn't the nice block Jennifer lived in, but instead a rougher area known for its high crime rate. They would go on to find one of Jennifer's fingerprints and a large boot print on the gas pedal. They also found a DNA fragment in the car that didn't belong to anyone Jennifer knew, but unfortunately it didn't match anyone already on the police database either. Maybe the worst though was that all her valuables were still in the car, suggesting it hadn't been a regular robbery. It also looked as someone had wiped the car down to remove any evidence they might have left. Weirdly, police also said there didn't seem to be any sign of a struggle.
Right.
After her car was thoroughly searched and no leads were found, police realized that there were plenty of surveillance cameras pointed in the direction near where the car was parked. The police then checked the cameras and found a single piece of footage of some time after she disappeared. In the video, a man dressed in workman's clothes parked Jennifer's car, sat motionless for 30 seconds, and then exited the vehicle and walked away. Unfortunately, there was no video of Jennifer in and around the car, just that single clip of the car, and then the car was abandoned afterward. And unfortunately, no matter what camera angle they looked at, a fence blocked the man's face, making it impossible to identify who it was. They tried everything they could to enhance the image, calling in favors from the FBI and NASA, who also did the best they could, but in the end, all they could really determine that it was a man between 5'3" and 5'5", with large feet for his height. This wasn't really helpful either because so many workers who fit that description lived in that building and the condos close to it. Quite a few of them were also people who worked on the conversions at Jennifer's own condo and had been given somewhere to stay while the work continued. So next, the police used a scent dog to see if they could find any trace of this person. The dog would go on to lead them from her car back to her condo complex, so they wondered if whoever it was in the video had returned to her condo parking lot after abandoning the car. It's possible he wasn't from the area at all and had only left the car to throw the police off his scent. While the investigation continued, Jennifer's parents moved into her apartment. They wanted to be as close to the investigation as possible, and living at the possible crime scene was as close as it got. But unfortunately, despite the video footage, police began by interviewing anyone close to Jennifer rather than following what seemed to be such an obvious lead, which was the man in the video. First, they interviewed her ex-boyfriend Matt. Jennifer didn't know this, but while she'd been in the Virgin Islands with Rob, her brother had invited Matt and another friend to stay with him at the condo. This actually wasn't all that unusual, since her brother and Matt were still good friends, but the police were told that Matt had been upset since they split up and was jealous of her relationship with Rob and wanted to get back together with her. Despite this, after the interviews, there was nothing to suggest that Matt had anything to do with her disappearance. They also quickly ruled out her family, and then Rob too. Then they questioned her coworkers, but again, this was just another dead end. In May of 2007, so several months after she disappeared, Jennifer's company put up a $1 million reward for any information that could help find her by July 4th. To claim the money, though, she had to be alive. The hope was that if she'd been abducted for human trafficking, the people involved might prefer a quick $1 million over the hassle of keeping her hidden. Unfortunately, July 4th came and went, and the money was never claimed. By then, Jennifer's family had had just about enough of the police, who they thought messed up the investigation from the start. They would go on to spend close to $100,000 on their own investigations and came up with some new and startling information. Not only were they the ones to find the witness who claimed to have seen the car swerving, but they also found evidence that seemed to suggest someone was thrown into the trunk of the car. Apparently, there were scratch marks in and around the trunk of the car that led them to make this conclusion. If they had known this from the beginning, there might have been more urgency during the initial stages of her disappearance. So, finally in frustration, Jennifer's parents went on to lobby with another missing woman's family for a bill to force law enforcement to reform how they react to missing persons. This was passed unanimously in 2008, but unfortunately, in the meantime, the case was passed from Orlando Police to the FBI in 2010, and then to Florida's Cold Case Unit in 2022. Today, Jennifer is still considered to be missing and in danger. For the Jamison family, life in Eufaula, Oklahoma was anything but quiet. Bobby, and recently divorced.
Okay, so real quick before we start the second story, it's someone named Jennifer Sweet Misery. I will drop his link in the chat if you want to go back and rewatch it and know who it was about, like the full name and stuff. This is who we're watching. We're watching Scary Interesting. And Mermaid, get some good rest, lovey. Thank you for showing up and hanging out. And I don't think he's saying condom, but I don't know. Okay, so this is the second one.
Recently divorced Sherry Lynn met and still considered to be missing and in danger. Passed from Orlando Police to the FBI in 2010, and then to Florida's Cold Case Unit in 2022. Today, Jennifer is still considered to be missing and in danger. For the Jamison family, life in Eufaula, Oklahoma was anything but quiet. Bobby, and recently divorced Sherry Lynn met in 2002, and their summer romance blossomed into marriage just 2 years later. The year before they were married, Bobby was in a bad car accident that caused chronic back pain that would continue to plague him for the rest of his life. From that point onward, he found it hard to work, and by the time he was 44, the agony and lack of a job were getting so bad that it was triggering bouts of depression. Despite their recent love and marriage, Sherry Lynn couldn't really care for him either because frankly, she had her own demons. When she was younger, her sister died after being stung by a bee, and from that point on, she struggled with her own deep depression. She had also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was known to avoid taking the medication she was prescribed for both. By 2009, so 5 years into their marriage, she was finding it difficult to look after their 6-year-old daughter Madison, her son from her first marriage Colton, and Macy, the family dog. And thus far, their marriage was not a happy one. Bobby and Sherry Lynn both found life hard, and sometimes that caused heated arguments, and any events outside their disabilities only made things worse. Things really started to escalate when Bobby and Sherry Lynn became convinced that their house was haunted. Their pastor even claimed that Bobby had been trying to exorcise the spirits and bought a copy of the Satanic Bible. After his pastor talked to him about it, Bobby claimed he was joking, but his pastor got the impression that Bobby wasn't joking at all. He tried to play it off, but it was fairly obvious he wasn't when he asked if there was some sort of bullet that he could use to shoot demons. Apparently, Bobby was convinced that 2 or sometimes 4 evil spirits were living on his roof, and Sherry Lynn believed it too. She said that both her and Madison had even seen the spirits inside the house. You see, at the time, Madison had an imaginary friend named Emily. It's obviously not unusual for 6-year-olds to have imaginary friends, and especially not in a family that keeps to themselves and whose kids don't have any close friends because of that. But Sherry Lynn was convinced that Emily was an evil spirit. According to their friends and family, Sherry Lynn thought Emily was a witch, and she'd hold seances to try to get the demons away from her daughter. The neighbors, for the most part, didn't take it as seriously as Sherry Lynn, but they did seem to agree that the house was haunted. Sherry Lynn's best friend Nikki claims that she felt a horrible presence and would leave feeling off and depressed whenever she went to the house. Whatever the case, weirdly, the Jamesons also owned a storage container like the type you'd find being loaded onto trucks from ships. One morning, the neighbors noticed that Sherry Lynn had graffitied all across the side of it. According to Sherry Lynn, a neighbor had poisoned her black cats, so to warn whoever she thought was doing it, she wrote, 3 cats killed to date by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed. And this was written in letters big enough for everyone to see. Unfortunately, supposed malevolent spirits weren't the only issues the family had. In July of 2009, Sherry Lynn lost a custody battle with her ex-husband over her son Colton. During the hearing, Colton, who was 12, apparently even said that he wanted to live with his father. He didn't like how weird his mom acted or how she was constantly depressed. Then, in addition to losing custody of Colton, the family was having issues with someone they were letting stay at their house, a man named Kenneth Bellows. He was a handyman and a friend of the family, and he lived with them for a short while so the Jamesons could get a little bit of extra income by renting a room. This was also to help Bobby with things he couldn't do because of his back, like lifting heavy objects. This was going well at first, but unfortunately, according to Nikki, Sherry Lynn told her that one night when Bobby was out, there had been an incident. Apparently, Kenneth sat uncomfortably close to her on the couch, got in her face, and told her he thought she was disgusting. He knew that she was part Native American, and he wanted her to know that he couldn't stand the sight of her. Sherry Lynn then stood up, went to another room, took out the family's .22 caliber pistol, and pointed it at Kenneth's head. She then told him to get out and never come back, but Kenneth called her bluff and said he knew she wasn't going to shoot him. So instead, she shot at the floor just in front of his feet. This got Kenneth moving, and he walked out with a gun pointed at his back and never stayed at their house again. But unfortunately, without the extra income from the room, this only exacerbated the money problems they'd been having. They constantly argued as they struggled to pay bills or cover the lawyer fees for Sherry Lynn's custody battle. It didn't help that they were also suing Madison's school after pulling her out of class. Making things worse still, if rumors are to be believed, around the same time Bobby had taken his father to court over the ownership of the family gas station in Oklahoma City. Bobby claimed that his father had agreed to give him half a stake in the business in return for some work he did for him. What his father was really doing, he said, was tricking him into working for nothing. According to Bobby, when he asked his father for his fair share, his father threatened to kill him and his family more than once. He would even call his father a dangerous man who believed himself to be above the law. All of this is to say that basically the family just seemed to run into problem after problem, either with the people they knew or from their own issues. And this would all finally blow up in September of 2009. Sherry Lynn, finding it impossible to take the strain of her depression, her son being taken away, the arguments with Bobby, and the overwhelming sense of paranoia she was feeling, had to be rushed to the hospital after doing something drastic. This was a big turning point, and the family decided they needed a change. So they came up with a plan to buy some land, take their storage container, and live inside of it off-grid away from the stresses of the world, whether they were demons or ex-husbands. And this was a plan they kept secret. None of their friends or family, including Colton, had any idea they'd even been planning to leave. On October 7th, they set off on a 50-mile drive to the city of Red Oak in the San Boa mountain range to visit a realtor to see a 40-acre plot on the Panola Mountain. This is an area in the eastern part of Oklahoma, close to the Arkansas border. The family thought that this plot of land might be a perfect place to put their container and start a new life that would solve all of their problems. Unfortunately, this wasn't smooth either, and on the way there, they got lost and had to abandon their plans and ask for directions home. The next day, something really strange happened. Video surveillance captured Bobby and Sherilyn walking backwards and forwards from their truck. In the footage, they made more than a dozen trips, but weirdly, sometimes they packed something into their truck, other times they walked up to it with nothing in their hands. Every now and then, they just stood still, their faces emotionless, as if they were in some sort of trance. On one of the trips, they loaded a brown case into the vehicle, and sometime later, Sherilyn dyed Madison's hair blonde. Sometime after that, they attempted to get to Red Oak again. This time, they found their way there with the help of a GPS and met with their realtor. Bobby then asked the realtor if they could see the land alone and asked for the GPS coordinates. This didn't seem too unusual, it just seemed like they wanted to explore the place independently and get their bearings. So they took their GPS unit and walked for about 15 minutes to the spot on the mountain. It was a quiet and secluded patch of forest, rarely touched by hikers or hunters. They spent a little while looking over what could be their new home, imagining what life might be like once they moved there, and then they returned to their truck. A little while after leaving, down a road northwest of Red Oak, they got out of their truck and locked the doors. Then, on October 12th, so 4 days after they went to visit the land, one of their phones called someone. The call went to voicemail, but the family didn't leave a message. And after that unanswered phone call, there was just no sign of the Jamesons. With that said, because they were very private, the family was actually known to disappear for long periods of time. Sometimes it would be weeks before any family or friends heard from them, so at first, nobody suspected anything. In the mountains, a few people even passed the Jamesons' abandoned truck. No one thought much of it and just thought they were another set of hikers who had driven up the trail a bit so they didn't have to walk as far. On October 17th, so over a week since the family was last seen, two hunters passed by on dirt bikes and thought they heard something coming from the truck. When they turned back to check it out, they found the family's dog Macy whimpering in the backseat, and she was so thin you could see her ribs. It was clear she'd been there for days, so the hunters decided to call the police. At first, local sheriffs thought the truck might have been stolen and had only been there for a short while, but one of the hunters said he'd seen it there for days. Macy, also being so malnourished, confirmed this. Before doing a thorough search, they checked to see if the truck might have broken down, but they would find that the truck had gas and didn't seem to have been in any sort of accident and ran just fine. Next, they thoroughly searched inside and found a bunch of the family stuff, including their coats, Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, cell phones, the GPS unit, and maps. There were also a couple of strange items in the truck. The first was a nasty 11-page hate letter that Sherilyn had written to Bobby. In it, she called him a loner and a hermit and listed everything she hated about him. She even wrote that she wanted a divorce. Maybe even more unusual than the letter, though, was the $32,000 in cash they'd stuffed under the driver's seat. Neither Bobby nor Sherilyn was working, so it was weird for them to be carrying so much money. It's also worth noting that there was no sign of the brown case that they had put in their truck in the video footage. There also didn't seem to be any sign of a struggle around the truck, but weirdly, it had stopped in the middle of the road rather than being pulled over and parked, which made it look like someone or something might have forced them to stop in that spot. But otherwise, there wasn't anything you'd expect if the family had been violently abducted, like traces of blood, broken glass, or any other signs of a struggle. There was also a lot of garbage scattered around the truck, as if they'd decided to throw everything out of it when they stopped. The whole scene was just very strange. The police decided to use their GPS and cell phones to see if they could trace the family's last movements. Eventually, they got to where the Jamesons had stopped the truck and realized that the last picture on one of the phones was Madison standing in front of a rock right where they were. There's been a lot of speculation about this picture. Madison is standing wearing a short pink top, her usually brown hair is dyed blonde, and her arms are folded. It's also a bit hard to read her facial expression. Some people think she looks uncomfortable, maybe even upset, while others think she's about to start laughing as her eyes and mouth are narrowed in a sort of smile. Other than this picture, the police were at a bit of a dead end in terms of leads, so they decided to begin a massive search of the area the following day. They used dogs, helicopters, and over 100 police and volunteers, but the search wasn't easy. The weather was terrible, the terrain was rugged, and hunting season had begun, so they had to be extra careful. Before long, the search was called off and no trace of the family was found. That was until 4 years later. For a long time, the most popular theory about their disappearance was that they'd run away for some reason. That might explain why Sherilyn had dyed Madison's hair and that there was no trace of them. It didn't explain why the money was left behind or why it looked like someone had stopped the truck, but it gave hope to their friends and family that the three were still alive somewhere. Then, on November 16th, 2013, deer hunters came across some skeletal remains in a remote area of Panola Mountain, just over 2 miles from where the Jamesons were last seen. These remains were the badly decomposing bodies of 2 adults and 1 child and were found arranged next to each other in a line. All that was left were 3 skulls, some of their bones, shoes, and some scraps of clothing. These were the remains of the Jamesons. Because of the advanced decomposition, it was impossible to work out what caused their death, but there was a small hole in Bobby's skull. The hunters who found them were sure that this was a bullet hole, and at first the police agreed, but after closer investigation, they realized there was just no way to know what caused the injury. The local sheriff's department and the FBI then spent months on a thorough investigation about how they might have died and possible leads or suspects, but for a while there was still nothing. They investigated Bobby's father, who had died just 2 months after his son's family disappeared, and was determined that it couldn't have been him. He was already unwell and living in a nursing home when they vanished. The FBI also traced Kenneth, the man who was living with them, and quickly ruled him out. It was briefly entertained that maybe he had hired someone in retaliation for being threatened, but the police and FBI thought this was a bit of a stretch. This left them with 2 more theories that they wanted to follow up on. First, they had to explain the $32,000 and the weird behavior on the day the Jamesons left for Red Oak. Some people have speculated that the trance-like state, the missing brown case, and the cash point to a drug deal gone wrong. It's an area well known for mobile meth labs, which are sometimes hidden along these small trails and in the forests. Given the Jamesons' odd behavior in the lead up to their disappearance, the $30,000, and the region's known link to drugs, it's not a huge stretch to think that they might have been on something. The problem with this theory is that the police found no sign of drug use at their home. On top of that, Bobby seemed to be strongly against abusing drugs. He'd even once reported a meth lab to the police anonymously, according to the people who knew him. It seems unlikely that he would get involved in something he found distasteful, or that might also implicate him if he was using. The second theory explored by authorities is the darkest. They figured maybe a disturbed Sherry Lynn or an angry Bobby had taken their .22 caliber pistol, marched the family up the mountain, and then shot all of them before turning the barrel on themselves. This seems to explain the weird behavior, the hate letter, and the small hole in Bobby's skull. But there are a lot of problems with this theory as well. First, there was no gun found at the site, and they found no evidence around the bodies that anyone even fired a gun. It would have also been difficult for whoever fired last to have lined themselves up so perfectly with the other victims, let alone the fact that there's no way they could have gotten rid of the gun after the fact. So, for the police, the case was a dead end and has remained a cold case ever since. There are still some other theories, however. People have speculated that the family didn't take that last photograph at all, but instead it was someone who either followed them or they encountered in the woods. People point to Madison's folded arms and hard-to-read expression as proof she was scared when that last picture was taken. So maybe something more sinister happened to the family. And finally, it's also possible they just decided to go for a walk through the woods near what would soon be their new home, got lost, and died from exposure. Maybe it was colder than they realized, and they went too far and got lost, and then eventually lay down where they were found. In any case, it seems that the family's end was as chaotic as the rest of their story. This is one of those cases that just seems to have more questions than answers, so I'm curious to hear what all of you think. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this set of stories. Just a reminder, we now have a Scary Interesting podcast where you'll find more stories just like this, released every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. The link for the podcast.
All right, y'all. What did you think of that one? The Jameson story, I think I actually have heard of that one, but it's been a minute. I didn't know there were so many layers to it. Cray, cray. Right? Well, that's something I didn't think I would hear today. And mobile meth lab. All right. OMG. Right? Crazy, I know, right? I'm going to, okay, I post that Scary Interesting's his channel link. So that's it for the chill stream. Those were good though, right? And now we're caught up and we'll have another one soon. Yay! I'm at a loss for words, right? Yeah, so that story is like insane. The one about the Jamesons, it's a crazy story. Like I can't wrap my head around all of it. And I kind of think that you're welcome, Lovey. I kind of think though, if they had did a suicide thing, wouldn't there? And how, I'm just wondering how decomposed could the bodies have been. Like, wouldn't there still be bullets in heads or bullets in bodies? Like, don't those just stay there? I would think, but maybe not. I don't know how long it was. What? No, Ash. Really? I have a story about my town that involves a man in a hospital parking lot. It was found and wasn't found for 3 months. Hold on. Really? Oh, wowzers. Yes. Ash, you should come up with me the next chill stream and tell everyone about it if you want to. That would be fun. Everyone have a everyone have a good night / morning, whatever it is to you. And I will see y'all later. Whoop.